What is your name, please?
Jennifer Stokes.
And you're from where?
I'm from New York, but I'm researching South Carolina.
Okay, so now did you come down with a New York group, or did you come down with a small group?
I came down on my own. I found out about the summit through Genealogist.com. It was posted there because I frequent that online site. However, I jumped on a plane from New York and knew that I wanted to be here and came down on my own.
What have you heard about Fort Wayne?
You mean before I got here or while I'm here? Well, I'd heard a lot about it. I mean, I'm certainly familiar with, just as being an American, certainly used to hearing about Indiana just sort of generally, from Fort Wayne to Gary to Indianapolis to so many wonderful places that I always wanted to learn a little bit more about. Also, I do know on Afrogenius there is one researcher who researches like her sort of like family, African American, in Indiana. So I think through that it also just gave me an opportunity just to learn a little bit more by being here. I think one of the things that's interesting to me is wherever I go, I love to see like who are the people, like what do they look like, what are they talking about, what are their needs, what are their concerns, challenges, and so I think this is an opportunity to do that. I didn't have, to be very honest, I didn't have Indiana necessarily like high up on my list of places to travel to, but I certainly took it as an opportunity to be able to, while it's like hot on the list now, an opportunity to see who are the people, what are they doing. So I'm excited to be here, that's for sure. And of course I know that it's the #2 in terms of genealogy. It's the #2 genealogical library in the nation. So I was excited about that as well.
Okay, so how long have you been doing this genealogical work?
A variety of methods. I mean, I use the internet, of course. Oh, for a very long time. I think since I was probably a teenager, for about for a while. Like I can dig up other people's like dates and births and everything. I'm like, but for a long time. I would say for about 20 years now. Yeah, about 20 years or so now.
So what originally got you started?
What got me started? I think I've always been, and I say always, I know that that's a tricky word because it doesn't help anyone to like pinpoint a time frame, but I've always been really interested in like hearing, when I went in the summers to visit South Carolina, to visit my grandparents and other extended family members. I've always been interested in like hearing the old stories of like who was who, and mentions of names from the past or current names. I was always interested in everything from where we attended church, and people would come over on Sundays and start like hugging me and saying, "Oh, I'm your family," and I would say, "Okay, I'll take your word for it." And so I mean, after a while, I wanted to know a little bit more about those connections. It was no longer, it sounds great, it feels great for someone to say, "Oh, this is my family," but even more, I wanted to go a little further and find out like exactly how are we family. And so I don't know. So it's been with me a long time. It's almost like in my spirit, if I can say that. Like even as a child, like it was something that I guess was birthed in me with all of those experiences of people talking about family and doing things like from music to food to to stories, all of that. I think it sort of like birthed something in me at that time. So it's always been with me, but I think I sort of made it more formal probably about 20 years ago at the Schomburg Library in Harlem. And so so to make that connection from the Schomburg Library to now the Allen County Library in Fort Wayne, I think is certainly exciting as well.
What have you found through your searches that just totally blew your mind that you didn't expect to see this?
There are a few things. I mean, I won't say, I know that my grandmother and great-grandmother, one of my paternal great-grandmothers as well, they were really active in sort of voter registration, some of the first like women voters in their county. That didn't blow my mind, but what did blow my mind is also finding out about some relatives, and I say relatives because I don't know exactly what the connection is just yet of how they relate to me. But in 1895, there was a Stokes, which is my surname, who was lynched in the county where I'm from. And like I said, I don't know specifically like if or how exactly he relates to me, but I do know from my research, especially with my mom and my dad being from the same county, same Colleton County, that more than likely there is some connection between me and this person. And so then as I started to research, William Stokes more and found out about other people in the county who were lynched as well with some of those surnames that I'm researching. It just, I mean, that's one of my, I'll call it side projects as well. Like as I'm researching my own family, I would eventually love to research that more as well. Just looking at Colleton County, looking at people who were lynched in the county and just trying to find out stories and connections and all of that. So that blew my mind. That did.
Were you always a student of history, or was your knowledge of history reinforced or stimulated by your knowledge of self?
Always a student of history. I would say so. I've been always like really intrigued by, really interested in history. I think what makes it more fascinating is when I can sort of place myself, when I say myself, via my family, via names and faces and all of that, like to history. I can sort of put it in context of, I mean, and that's part of what genealogy is about also, just looking at that timeline, you know, so I can plug into the, you know, American Revolution, or I can plug into my Civil War ancestors, or I can plug into the Great Migration, or one of the all of the waves of the Great Migration. And so, I mean, I think that makes it like living history, certainly, that I can plug my history into that greater, our history, but certainly I've always been interested, but certainly it just brings it more alive to know that I can plug myself right front and center, that we're not necessarily the objects of, but subjects of, you know, of that history.
So you know, you said something curious there. So what do you think, if you had a chance to talk to people from the school systems, what can they do to make history more of more interest to students? Because a lot of students I talk to, their ears fold forward when we start talking about history. It doesn't connect with them. So how can you make history simple for young kids to understand?
Well, history is not simple at all, but I mean, it certainly, I think, would excite and encourage, words that you used. I mean, I think one way of doing it is just that. I mean, I don't know if there is a way to incorporate, I would hope that there is a way to incorporate genealogy within you know, education, within our educational system somehow. I think certainly that brings it alive, that brings it front and center when you can place names. And I think even when I think back at PBS and say African American Lives, and seeing those celebrities and how they're, you know, like looking into the history of, I think one of the things that it emphasizes is it doesn't necessarily have to be a Chris Rock or a I guess the list could go on and on, Oprah, for someone to actually, it's our history. Like, you can take anyone probably and be able to find out a little bit more about their stories or names, and you can find that it's not, all of that is our history, and I think it's very tangible. And I think a lot of times when people think of history, because their names are not included, or their family names or names that they can relate to, I think there is like sometimes a glazing over of the eyes. But I would hope that it can be incorporated in our educational system somehow, and I do believe that would certainly make a lot of young people more interested. I always share with my own nephews and nieces and other young people in the family about making those connections, certainly.
Thank you very much.
Sure, you're welcome. Thank you. Thank you so much.